Dave Landa. Dave Landa is here with us. He is the CEO of Kingtone Corporation, the U.S. subsidiary of Japanese public company Stepbystep Inc., a public company that provides the Kingtone no-code digital workplace platform to over 20,000 organizations globally. Dave has been at the forefront of the cloud revolution for the last 2 decades, driving strategic business development on the executive teams of multiple leading SaaS application providers. He is a published author, frequent speaker, and recognized thought leader on digital transformation, the no-code development revolution, and company culture. Dave, tell us where you're coming from today, which is a super special place, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation to our global audience.
Well, thank you, Jose. I really appreciate it. I'm coming from Turks and Caicos, actually. Yeah, my vacation happened to align with this conference, so really excited to be doing this presentation from a very remote location, as the case may be.
That's fantastic.
And good. Yeah, thanks, Jose. So I guess let's go ahead and jump right in. Thank you so much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone from all over the world, and welcome to my talk. I'm really excited to be sort of kicking things off here this morning for the 3 days. And my talk's on creating a sustainable remote workforce strategy in the post-pandemic era. And as Jose said, I'm Dave Landa, CEO of Kingtone Corporation, which is a U.S. subsidiary of a very progressive Japanese software company that's been public on the Tokyo Stock Exchange for over 20 years, actually. And I've been the head of Kingtone here in the US for almost 7 years, and have been leading and building SaaS companies for just about 20 myself. So feel free to reach out to me anytime, connect with me via LinkedIn. Would love to connect and chat with anyone. So a quick look at the agenda today. You'll see that what I like to call the transformation triangle plays a really big role of what I'll be covering today. And I want to make sure that you all know we've made some time at the end for a Q&A session. So please go ahead and kind of collect your questions as we go. And let's go ahead and get started. So I know we've been dealing with some pretty nasty Delta variant resurgences in some parts of the country, but there will come a time when at least the COVID pandemic panic subsides and remote work returns to being an option across the board and not something mandated or required. But as this time has been arriving already in different regions and at different organizations already, it's become pretty clear that the end of COVID will not mean the end of remote work. There are certainly things that we're really happy to get back to doing in person, like graduations and proms, and seeing and hugging our relatives again, right? And gathering at events, fun music and sporting events. But there's actually no shortage of news these days about the fact that work does not necessarily line up the same way these days. It's more about people wanting to maintain their remote work flexibility while leaders and organizations really struggle to find the right path forward. You know, we can see the controversy around Apple's 3-day-a-week mandate versus someone like Facebook's continued flexibility. Or we can hear how Citibank's remote work flexibility versus JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs's in-person requirements is giving hope to Citibank that they'll be able to maybe poach some of the top talent from those other banks. But the reality is that people wanted remote work even before COVID. These stats from 2019 study show 4 out of 5 workers would turn down a job that doesn't offer work flexibility and would be more loyal to those that did. while 3/4 stated that they would actually move jobs based on work from home or remote work policies. Now, folks, you may not want enforced work from home 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, but they definitely want remote work as an option in their lives. Even before the COVID experience, that was the case. Moreover, studies before COVID already recognized and provided significant evidence that remote work can be good for businesses as well. And many of the stats coming out of the COVID period have shown on average even higher rates of productivity improvement for remote workers and remote work organizations. Indeed, just as none of us are the same post-COVID, remote work is different now too. The forced experience of it with a much broader base made all those statistics real for so many more employees and employers. Digital transformations planned for years had to come in weeks and months for some orgs, and often very haphazardly, with a common mantra of, let's figure it out as we go. We're just not the same. Our knowledge and expectations are very different now. I think we've all kind of, taken a little bite of the forbidden fruit when it comes to remote work, and I think there's no turning back at this stage. So with that as a backdrop, I want to share an extraordinary example of how a $1 billion Japanese public company with operations globally was able to go fully remote when COVID hit without a hitch in essentially a day because of the remote and hybrid work strategy that they had already been pursuing prior to COVID. In fact, this company, my parent company, Stepbystep Inc., with over 1,000 employees spread out throughout Japan, China, Vietnam, Australia, and the US, had in many ways been preparing for the awful events of early 2020 for about 15 years now. A truth we learned many years ago at Kinton and Stepbystep is that crises lead to transformations. But for transformations to be successful, be they cultural transformations or digital transformations or any other type of organizational transformation, 3 key elements need to come together intentionally and reinforce one another throughout the journey. In Stepbystep's story, they actually had a turnover crisis about 15 years ago, where an employee departure rate got close to 30%. That, thankfully, drove a radical change to a much more employee-centric mindset of the organization. And the key starting point in any such transformation is being intentional with the vision. And in turn, they created policies that were very much intended to nurture that vision. In Stepbystep's case, the vision proposed back in 2005 was this idea of 100 different people have 100 different work styles. And policies that flowed from that vision were in support of parents, offering extended leaves, re-entry programs, and childcare, as well as to support folks who wanted to work part-time, do side jobs, and of course, work from home and remote work. But as Stepbystep found out, and the founders of 37 Signals and Basecamp highlighted in their seminal 2013 book, Remote, Office Not Required, it's the technology, stupid. Indeed, we needed the right tools and technology to be able to actually practice these policies in a meaningful and non-disruptive way. For us, it actually started with being able to collaborate extensively and see and manage operations remotely. And thankfully, Stepbystep's core digital workplace technology, which is Kinton, was able to do just that. The cloud-based centralized platform allowed our different teams to be able to access the right data and their operations at any time from anywhere, and communicate with their teammates seamlessly to get things done. People could be in the office or at home with a sick kid, or in Florida or Okinawa or perhaps Turks and Caicos, beating the cold weather, or Alaska or Nagano, beating the heat, and still be able to see what's happening with a project and move things forward for all to see. And with its no-code built centralized web applications that allowed folks to replace disconnected spreadsheets and digitalize and automate old manual or paper-based processes, a digital transformation occurred hand in hand with this cultural transformation that was leading to an organization with a centralized data visibility and access, more efficient and transparent operations and reporting, which was built for flexibility and ready to scale. Indeed, it was this kind of powerful collaborative tool that gave Cybozu the flexibility and the capability to make good on these new progressive policies that they presented, giving their stakeholders the freedom they wanted while still being able to maintain and even increase their productive teamwork. So with the policies and the technology tools in place, one more component was still needed: the actualizations, we like to call it, or the activities and exercises and even the expressions that are necessary to practice, maintain, support, and develop the remote teamwork culture vision they had. Some examples of these actualizations in Cybozu's or Kintone's case meant open executive and departmental meetings for all to see, hear, and read, and even listen to. Our KPT, or our Keep Problem Try, through public reviews of all of our events, campaigns, and activities. Our regular problem-solving sessions that include a transparent yet safe space for problem sharing, and a detailed problem-solving method called the Aspiration Engine. Our TTTs, known as the Tuesday 10 o'clock touch bases, which are our weekly all-hands live catch-up, and something called PIGs, or our personal interest groups, that encourage, through stipends, team members to pursue personal interests together to build greater team. And as well, some mottos or expressions, such as things like, it's okay to mess up, just don't lie, trying to really encourage the transparency element. And the key here to all of these activities is reinforcing the company's teamwork culture, is that they're all accessible and actionable in person or remotely via that centralized digital workplace platform. So what can we pass on from this example? I think there's three key things initially. First is keeping in mind this triangle, right? The importance and the interdependence of these three elements of the transformation triangle: policies, tools, and actualizations. Second is to be very intentional about it. You build your operations, your communications, your data channels, and especially your culture with remote and hybrid work firmly in mind. And finally is definitely to be patient. This is the chart of Cybozu's sales growth, the blue bars there, and the employee turnover with the red line. The crisis, like I mentioned, hit right around 2004, 2005, and the new vision and the related policies rolled out in late 2005, 2006. Turnover definitely started going down with the new vision and the intention, but it took quite some time for the business and productivity to come along as implementing the tools and the actualizations. And so getting both the culture and the productivity right took some years as we pieced it all together. But now with accelerating growth and turnover under 5% for close to a decade, the formula has definitely been very well developed. So let's dig into some suggested prescriptions in a little more detail now before we jump into Q&A session. And I want to start with some of the policies. So this first one may have become clear as folks started to experience work from home for the first time last year. I know many found it hard to separate when their personal lives began and their work lives ended when you're at home. Maybe they were suddenly at the office the moment they woke up simply because they could reach their computer from their bed. Or maybe they couldn't figure out how to go offline when something like Slack is always online, right? These problems were and continue to be pretty serious ones because they actually impact workers' mental health and an employee's ability to perform in the long run. And if a person never feels like they're off, how can they take the time to really recharge and relax and come back with more energy? So it's really important, if it's not already formalized, to encourage team members to have a clear sign-on and sign-off times. The next one is, have employees update their coworkers on their weeks. Like what happened? What did they do? Little reports on a weekly basis that individuals can do for their team members. Talking about what webinar maybe they heard, or what client call they may have sat in on. Encouraging more communication rather than less is really important, and it's actually one of the key benefits of going remote. And then also track meeting minutes so your team can see what they've missed and they can stay caught up. It's easy to fall into data silos when people aren't physically present. And make sure that you can always get actually more information from the processes that you have in place, not less than before you've gone work from home. And as you start bringing big meetings back to the office or to in-person off-site locations, like quarterlies, for example, figure out how to offer both in-person and remote options more effectively, how to create that hybrid model. We actually just did one 2 weeks ago, our first quarterly meeting. It was definitely challenging, but amazingly rewarding, and we were able to get sort of the two different experiences dialed in pretty well. In all these Zooms or GoToWebinar and remote meetings, they're leaving the extroverts kind of dying on the vine. 93% of communication is nonverbal, with 55% of that in body language. So there's no doubt we are losing parts of our communication toolkit when we go remote. And things that get left unsaid are really, tend to be left uncommunicated altogether. So one really important thing is to have intentional camera on policies when full communication and connection is important. And always explore and experiment any new verbal ways for people to interact with one another. Finally, be sure to create clear policies around your project and your operations data, as well as your communications data. I'll get into that in a little more detail in a moment. But especially if you're using new channels or tools to communicate and manage operations, it's really important to think about how your data will be shared, accessed, and discussed. This will help minimize security issues and maximize accessibility, and in turn, employee empowerment in this remote experience, remote environment. Also, with respect to deploying remote work policies, this is something, I jumped ahead there, but something to consider, and some organizations are starting to actually look into hiring ahead of remote to be able to really get their hands around all these different policies and the implementation. So something to keep in mind. We haven't done that to date, but we've been considering it. Yeah, here's just a quick screenshot. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this, but the gallery This is of our TTT I mentioned, the Tuesday 10 o'clock touch base that all of our different teams get together. Originally, we would have in-person teams in a circle around the big screen, and then the remote folks would dial in, and we'd kind of have that connection. One thing we did immediately when we went like totally remote was to ensure and make it a policy that everybody would always be on screen, always have their video on for this particular meeting. So it's really important to think about your regular meetings and think about that camera policy, as it really does create that connection that's important when you're remote or in a hybrid scenario. Now, next, we need to think about the tools and technology from a long-term perspective, I would say, in terms of being able to support remote and hybrid operations. This image depicts kind of a common separation between process and operations data on the one hand, and communications and collaboration data on the other. This separation can be very inefficient, with team members spending lots of time just trying to find what they need to then actually be able to do their work that they set out to do. So you can see lots of different apps that might be focused on communication, while lots of other apps that are focused on your operations. That separation is really something to keep in mind. You know, we often think we can use email or Slack better if we have some guidelines or some rules, and maybe that will solve some of this disconnect. But the reality is, how clear your coworker is being won't necessarily matter if you're communicating on Slack while they're looking for it in email, or if the files you sent them are in Google Drive, but they're checking into their Dropbox or their Box accounts, right? In fact, oftentimes it's our software, especially when we're using so many different apps, so many different kinds of software, that is one of the biggest reasons why we feel disorganized and overwhelmed sometimes. So this is a really critical point, right? Make as much of your digital information as easily and centrally accessible as possible. In detail, it's really about access, 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 right? With your work for home members, they're really depending entirely upon the tools that you give them to have access to everything they need to do their jobs. It's imperative that you think about your operations and your collaboration data in terms of accessibility, and adopt the tools that make that a priority. Next, figure out which conversations live where. If you're using Slack, if you're using Zoom and Outlook, which kind of information is going into which of these channels. It's important also to know if you can access that information at a later time, as well as who can access it, right? For example, information that's shared over limited Slack channels means it's only available to those who were not only in the chat, but were around when the conversation happened. And then map out where your operation and your process data lives, and consider how to get related communication data closer and closer to it. Now, how can you track, store, and share all of it more seamlessly? And then start with easy wins. Prioritize, the ones that you're going to be able to bring together more quickly. Maybe some more obvious opportunities. Maybe new projects or some lightweight processes you're working on. And then there's many things that you are probably not going to be able to do right off the bat. So you collect those up in a central repository and have team members add on to it. And then have someone regularly review that repository. Make sure to ID all of the different workflows that aren't working, so you can start breaking down those workflows on an action item list and how to fix them using any new tools that you have when the time comes around for those ones. And then finally, this is some basic stuff, but ask your team. I know we had a number of different savvy team members, and they were doing a lot of figuring out of things on the fly over the last year plus. And I'm sure, you know, all your organizations have some technology pioneers as well, who know a thing or two about a number of different new tools. You know, with them, dig deeper into some of the processes that may not be working too well remotely, and ask these pioneers what solutions and tools they might think offer greater access, transparency, and efficiency. And there's an interesting thing to consider actually when going from a fully in-person environment to either a fully remote or a flexible hybrid environment. You know, these sort of wondrous in-person water cooler moments of serendipitous innovation and problem solving, kind of by their very nature, they actually lack quite a bit of transparency. And I think you might recognize many of these offline in-person interactions have the effect of limiting information sharing and capture within an organization. So in order for communication to be really useful, it needs to be searchable, it needs to be organizable, ideally around relevant operations, and visible or accessible to others. So going remote and requiring information to be easily, asynchronously, and location agnostically accessible develops a transparency that is both, you know, good for organizations and good for employees. There's less wasted time figuring out where to go and who to ask or how information is shared, and more time spent learning from the data and the interactions of others on these public channels, be it Kintone, Slack, Zoom, or others. By making conversations traceable and focusing on that as a part of your new remote work strategy, you don't just make it possible to eliminate redundancies and create clear highways for information, you also improve employee happiness. As studies have consistently shown, transparency is actually the #1 factor in determining employee happiness. Now, here are 3 quick examples of conversations that might have happened offline before, but happened online now that we went remote. For example, someone taking a day off and sharing that. They may have just shared it with their boss, and other team members may not have known they were taken off for the day. You know, someone sharing a useful video tutorial may have shared it in an email just to one friend who asked, but when you share it in that central repository, then anyone could have access to it. And then maybe someone seeking updated software license they didn't have access to. So again, the whole team will quickly and easily see it, have access to it for the future in a searchable, centralized database like this. And you know, with this one, yeah, and so when we were offline, conversations were often held in person. Like I said, if we had meetings, everyone took away personal notes on their roles and responsibilities. But 6 to 12 months later, right, if the project scope has shifted, employees have come and gone, and only a few people have kept their initial notes. And there's a question of accountability at that stage. You know, who's responsible for what? The answer may come down to who has the best documentation is really what it comes down to. Even if others don't agree with it, because personal documentation might be flawed, subjective, and may be less than reliable. So the key, yeah, so first the key is to pick tools that have great accessibility. So all people can see and agree on the same responsibilities and tasks. And be able to refer back to this agreed upon source of truth 3 days or 3 months later into the project. An example of this, of course, might be Google Docs, which allows for a wide range of employees to participate on different levels as document viewers and editors. Second, create those rules around how documentation works. If you've got data in an Excel spreadsheet, how are people allowed to give feedback? Can they send it privately via email or over a Slack channel? Post comments in the Excel spreadsheet itself. Can you do that? If you create rules to streamline your collaboration, you can save yourself a lot of time cross-checking different channels to make sure you got it all. It's also imperative to make sure you actually make the rules visible. So sorry, I think I moved around a little bit. Here's an application we actually built in Kintone to handle all of our marketing content requests, as well as the workflow for each request. As you can see here in red, that we've posted the rules exactly for how a request is created and what a person needs to fill out depending on their type of request. And that's one of the most important things you can do to keep projects accountable. Create those standards, not just for your data, but also for your collaboration. All right. So as I mentioned, start documenting more projects, more meetings, and more conversations. But the fact that you don't know doesn't mean it doesn't have to be useful to someone. So as long as it's documented, it's always better to err on the side of caution. So who knows who might be able to access it at a later time and find use in it. Yeah, sorry. And so finally, we need to further actualize these policies and tools with actions, exercises, these activities and expressions. So here are some examples of how we work to actualize and exercise transparency and the access that is necessary for trusting, effective, and efficient remote and hybrid work. And it all starts from the top, as it should. Our corporate founder and CEO doing quarterly Q&A sessions, not only for our US team, but for all of our different teams globally. And all of those recordings and the Q&A content are kept for anyone to access later. And that leads into our corporate weekly executive meetings and even our monthly board meetings, which are totally open for any non-exempt team member who wishes to sit in, as well as have access to the full notes and translations and even the recordings that are provided later. Next, we rigorously practice this problem-solving method I had mentioned before, utilizing that central application platform. So it encourages everyone to be on the lookout for issues and to raise them unhesitatingly and have everyone be able to access the work that's been done on those issues. And then we practice many different aspects of Kaizen. I mentioned KPT earlier, which is our Keep, Problem, Try solution. It's an application that we use to review all of our events and activities for continuous improvement. And then finally, we have been implementing a distributed decision-making method, utilizing a decision-making app and an input and opinion app that easily allow for asynchronous team participation in key decision-making, and then in the end, a much better considered and much better recorded decision-making process. So looking to wrap up here, remember the intentional interaction and mutual reinforcement of these three elements of the transformation triangle: the policies, the tools, and the actualizations. And it's absolutely critical when we think about a long-term flexible work style approach to be very intentional about putting those pieces together for a remote or partially remote environment. And let's not waste all that we were forced to learn this past year and a half, and not only be fully prepared to meet stakeholders where they are and want to be, but be totally ready to thrive in this current and future location agnostic workplace reality that we are now living in. So with that, I want to thank you. Before moving on to Q&A, I just want to call out that if you are interested, you can download some slides from our interface. For this deck, you can reach out and request the deck. And then also you can get access to our full ebook on going remote through the link here on the page. And also a recording to a recent webinar about how to build a better remote work experience with less software. That gets into more details of the tools that I went over briefly just now. And with that, I think back to you, Jose. Thank you.
That is terrific, Dave. And just so you know, Melina here has published the links, so the audience has access to the links through the chat. So take a look at the chat and the links that we have, and this is for the audience. And Dave, I'm going to ask you to stop showing your presentation screen to the audience so that I can come up with you. And so terrific presentation. Thank you so much for sharing this insights. It's about what it really takes to make a digital workplace work well. It's really the very last portion of a presentation there when you're talking about the steps that the organization has taken, the highest level of leadership to be more open and transparent. That says a lot about the commitment of the leaders and the organization. But I have lots of questions, but I'm most interested in what the audience has to ask. So I'm gonna go straight to the questions from the audience here. And the first one is kind of a foundational one. This is coming from Frank De Souza, who is a leader at iPlace in Pune, India, and they do placements all over the world, and specifically the United States, for professionals. So this question on the digital workplace is very prominent from employers and employees, what it means. And you talked about this, but if you could restate for us, and his question is, how will a digital workplace help the employees? And how do we know that they are on board with it? You mentioned a few things here, but I would like to hear directly from you. You know, what difference does it make for people, and how do we know that they are ready for it?
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of how can a digital workplace help employees, I think it's, you know, done right, and it's an extremely empowering platform and power solution. If you just think, I mean, it gets back to the very fundamental concept of knowledge is power. And with a digital platform, a centralized digital workplace like this, folks can have access to the information that they need at their fingertips. And information and data, be it, like I was mentioning, sort of this operations data that is data associated with your production or your various different workflows, right next to the information, you know, centralized digital information around the people collaboration, that gives a full spectrum of information to all the different team members who have access to that, and gives them the power to make better decisions, to find information more quickly, to get their work done more efficiently and more flexibly. So certainly it gives them access to more data more quickly, more efficiently, but then also because of that, you get the flexibility to be able to either, you know, work from home, work remotely, work from Turks and Caicos, what have you. So that sort of flexibility, we know through many studies, is appreciated by employees and stakeholders quite greatly.
Very good, very good. And you highlighted so many of those benefits. And of course, you know, when a global pandemic happened, as you said, those who were ready for it benefited tremendously from it. The next question here comes from Anish Paul, and Anish says that his comment, first of all, fantastic presentation. It's great because he said, I came in here thinking that you're going to talk about technology, and you did, but what you did a very good job conveying is that technology is really a tool here for us to be able to collaborate more effectively and get the work done in a more productive way. But also, you talk a lot about the human side of collaboration and connection. And there is a technical aspect of this that Anish wants to point out. And he says legacy systems. So he finds that in his organization, his legacy systems play a roadblock for this model of remote working. And he's curious about how you overcame that. And he's talking about things like, getting client approval, system logistics, and all that stuff sometimes you have to do to allow people to collaborate in these legacy systems. Curious about how you work around some of that.
Yeah, great question. Legacy systems are a challenge for sure. And what I mentioned in one of my slides there in terms of the approach, what we've done with a lot of our clients is gradual, step by step. Find sort of the easy wins, find maybe a new process or workflow that is not yet sort of tied down by legacy systems or is tenuously attached, and you can actually make a disconnect and start with a new centralized digital platform to work on that. We've done that countless times. I said we have over 20,000 clients globally. We've done that type of transformation where it's step by step. Make sure you create a success initially, be able to show that success, have people experience that success, and then start moving from there. It is oftentimes a gradual process. I can't deny that. But once team members start seeing that, and once other members of a workflow, so we've got some larger clients who initially created a solution, a digital workplace platform, just to manage their own sort of project management for creating new retail store sites internally, but then they recognized they had designers and they had suppliers of product coming, and that whole workflow, piece by piece, they started bringing together into that centralized workflow once they had their own piece figured out internally. So it is kind of step-by-step process, and you really need to get that success small initially to then start building out. That's been our best formula for success.
That's terrific. Lots of comments here about the presentation. What a great presentation. Someone refers to it as the digital workplace manifesto, what you have shared with us here, and which is in a very positive way that he says that. And so I'll wrap up with some of the questions that came up were around technology itself. You mentioned a few technologies during your presentation that can be used for better collaboration. We really appreciate the fact that you emphasized that there is a need to have communication systems and collaboration systems behind those technologies so that the technologies can work effectively. So we understood that, and this is incredibly powerful what you communicated to us. But if we go back to the layer of technology itself, are there any technologies that you have find very useful beyond just remote work and in terms of collaboration for the work that we do? Have any tools that stand out for you that have been particularly helpful?
Yeah, I mean, beyond Kintone, which is what we kind of use all day, every day, that is that's our own platform that we utilize. That is kind of the no-code platform that you can build operation workflows and databases where you then have your collaboration built right on top of it in sort of a single layer. I think for us, obviously for communication, Zoom, like everyone else, has been our primary means of video communication, and we couldn't have done it without that. We couldn't have kept our team together. We couldn't have kept the interactions and the culture together that way. But in terms of getting, communication and collaboration data alongside and sort of teed up together with workflow and operations. There's a handful of organizations that do that. Obviously I'm going to say Kintone because that's what we do. That's really our focus, bringing those two different data sources together seamlessly. So yeah, so I don't have other key ones I can call out, but certainly Kintone, if you have a look at that, it's very flexible.
That's terrific. And the Kintone, as you mentioned, no-code platform has been leveraged for more than 20,000 organizations globally. So you're doing some very good things there. They're helping organizations be more collaborative, be more effective. Dave, thank you so much for sharing your industry and thought leadership of our global audience today. We enjoy your presentation. The insights are very practical and forward thinking. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jose. I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to a great 3 days here and learning from everybody else. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Landa there with us, the CEO of Kintone. What a tremendous masterclass on what it takes to create a modern digital workplace that works, that allows people to collaborate towards a common purpose and create value for all that are engaged in that journey. Terrific presentation. We are going to be taking a break now, and we're going to close the session and we're going to reopen at the top of the hour. And at the top of the hour, we're going to bring the former director of information technology from Brother, and she is going to talk about insights on how to improve enterprise security that enables smooth operations, especially with the shift in paradigm of the digital workforce and remote work. So a bit of a shift now into the digital workplace and taking a look at from an enterprise security perspective. And I'm talking about Ajita Narayanan, and I'm very excited to welcome at the top of the hour and see you back. Fantastic questions, great first session, much more to come. Keep up the great engagement. Again, we're getting to as many questions as possible. So the ones that we can get to, check the LinkedIn post under my name, and there is interaction going on there where you can ask questions, think, and interact with our sponsors and our speakers. So for now, short break. See you back at the top of the hour.